Pass, pass the microphone to Peter.
All right, thanks very much, Julia, and great to be here. I want to just say welcome first of all. I think it's great to see Invest Nova Scotia, putting the emphasis on this. And there's lots of different sectors in the province, and food and beverage is such an important one. So really excited to be here and share some insights this morning about exporting food and beverage, and then also just the whole series that Yulia and the team from Invest Nova Scotia put together. We've got some great people coming up over the next sessions to talk about all things that people need to focus on when exporting. It's a great opportunity, but also a complicated opportunity. So we've got a great team of people to share some insights with you, to help you and support you on that journey. And it's always a challenge because there's so many different ways to export food and beverage. It could be a commodity, it could be a finished consumer packaged good, it could be to a market that's a few hours away, or it could be on the other side of the world. So there's a lot of different things that we can focus on when we're talking about it. So we're going to try to cover as many of those different things as we can. And the other thing is we want to make these sessions interactive. I mean, everybody, we've been working hard on the content to create things that are relevant for you and will support you in your business. But also, we want it to be interactive. Yulia set up the meetings so that people can ask questions, and we want you to, if you have something that comes up while somebody is doing a presentation, feel free to put it in the chat. We'll keep an eye on that. And then also we'll have some time at the end of each segment where we can do some Q&A so that we give you an opportunity to ask questions, and that's what we're here for, to share some of those insights, but also to address things that are top of mind for you that might be specific to your part of the business or a specific market, and that kind of thing. So we do encourage you to do that, and we'll do our best to address those. We'll take some breaks and talk about them. So I'm going to dive into to some information that I prepared to share for you about sort of getting on the shelf and getting into the shopping cart. And then at the second segment in this morning's session, we have Maria Bartlett from Invest Nova Scotia. And Maria's going to talk about some great things to do with trends and international things happening out there. So let me just dive in, and we'll start talking about getting on the shelf and into the shopping cart, which is sort of my perspective. One of the most important things, as I said, there's all kinds of different things you have to focus on with regards to export, but my part of the business is really focused on that. And for those of you who don't know me, my background is been my entire career has been in food and beverage. I had the opportunity. I started working at a store in Fredericton, New Brunswick, and the grocery industry was not sort of my plan as a career, but that's the way it worked out, for which happens to many of us in this business, I think. So I did work at a store, and then went on to work with Loblaw companies for about 20 years in Atlantic Canada, and worked in different capacities there, marketing and advertising. And then I switched to the merchandising part of the business. And then when Loblaw was consolidating a lot of functions in Ontario, we decided for our family that we liked living in Nova Scotia. I'm in Halifax, and that we would stay here. So for the last 15 years, I've been on my own, supporting producers and processors, and helping them build relationships with retailers, and trying to help them grow their businesses. So that's what we do at SKU Food, and it's great to be here with you this morning. So when I was choosing the images for the presentation, this one was one that I thought was relevant when we talk about getting on the shelf and in the shopping cart in export markets. And it obviously depends on how far you're going to go. But this photograph was from a home sense store in Korea. So you can see that the American section, which we don't even, in Canada, we don't even get credit, is reduced to sort of a 4 foot section in that store. So we always have to remember when we're exporting is how important it is to really understand the market, where you're going to compete, and really who you're going to have to compete against. So, and one of the things which for me is always so important when I'm working with people in food and beverage, there's so much work that people put into developing a product, all the R&D, the work to get a product produced and packaged and ready for sale, whether it's starting out at a market and then growing from there. But I just always try to remind people that success is not just about producing a great product to sell, it's about selling that great product you produce. And we have so many great products that are out there that it's really you kind of have to have a great product to have a chance at success. And then when you want to be successful, you've got to put that effort into selling that great product that you produce. And there's so many different channels and opportunities with export, but it's still important that you have to make sure that your business is set up so that you can get the product produced, but also focus on that sales part of being successful in the business. So for us, when we're working with people, trying to help them and support them on this, we have a process that we go through, and surprisingly enough, it spells cart. That's just by fluke. But what we like to do is start with the consumer, and I think you really have to understand who is going to be buying your product, and that's such a fundamental piece in all this is who is that consumer. And then we talk about alignment, and that's alignment with the customer, the people who are giving you the purchase order, whether that's a retailer or a distributor, that component of the value chain. And then you need that retail plan. You need to have a plan in terms of how that product's going to sell. So that includes your pricing and distribution and all those kind of things. And then the last piece, which from my experience working on the retail side is really important, is trust. And we need to have trust between the supplier, the seller, and the consumer. And when we can get that triangle of trust going, then we can develop some prosperous business relationships for everybody. So we're going to dive into each of those segments and talk about them a little bit and share some insights with you on that. So the first one for me is consumers. And you really need to understand who are they. And consumers are changing so fast out there. And in export markets, that's a challenge to understand who they are. But there's resources available to help you do that. And if you're going to be successful, you really need to understand who are these people who are going to be purchasing your products. And you need to think about why are they buying. And I always want to remind people that consumers buy more for benefits than features. And often it's easier to talk about the features of your product. So if it's a loaf of bread, it's sliced, it's got this ingredient or that ingredient, which are good features of the product. But if you can push past that and talk to the benefits of your product for that target market, then you have a much greater chance of getting people to pick up your product and put it into the shopping cart. So really want to think about why they buy. And then the last piece in the consumer is where do they shop? So you've identified this target market, and there's lots of things you can do to quantify that in terms of demographics. And then you can think about sort of more psychographic kind of things like what are they interested in? But it's also important to think about where do they shop and which are the retailers that you want to target in that particular market where you want to export, and where are you going to find your people? And it's again, there's lots of resources to help you with that. If you're thinking in export markets, there's trade commissioners who have usually some pretty good knowledge. And one of the things which I always recommend if you're working with on the export side out of the country, the trade commissioners are usually set up by geography, but some of them have specific expertises. And it's really important to find the people who have that expertise in food and beverage. And that can be a big advantage to you when you're looking at those markets. So for sure, you want to understand those consumers and make sure that you understand why they're going to buy and where they hang out. So once you have established some of that, then you can start to think about alignment and alignment with either a retailer or a distributor, no matter which channel, which part of the market you choose to sell into. And usually, the number one priority for those people is sales. And when we talk about sales, it means that your product needs to sell at the price that either you need to get for it and that they need to get for it. So just make sure that you have, and we're going to talk about product pricing when we get into sort of that retail plan piece, but you need to make sure that your product is going to sell and deliver the sales expectation. And For me, one of the most important numbers and conversations that you need to have with your customer in an export market is what is that expectation for sales? And you could do some of your own research when you do things like trying to understand how big the target market is and some of those kind of things. But you both need to have a common sort of definition of success for sales because that's what's going to get you the next order. A lot of times we can get a first order. But what's going to get you the next order is that your product sells through for them at the price that you both need to make it successful. So make sure that you have that conversation about sales and what is the expectation. And a lot of times with export, we're trying to also maximize things like logistics. So it might have to get to the level of one container or two containers or one full load if it's trucking and that kind of thing. So you need to make sure that there's a balance there, but you need to have that common definition of success for sales. And the next thing that you need to think about is margin. You need to make enough so that it works for you. And then the next layer in that value chain also needs to make enough so that it works for them. So understand the margins that they need to get when they're selling your product. So if you're selling direct into my picture there is Zabar's. If any of you've ever been to New York, that's a great place to visit if you want to see food and beverage. Um, but if you're wanting to export and sell into them, then you need to understand the margins they need to get on their products so that they stay in business. So understand the margins that you need to get and understand the margins for your customers. The next thing, which has become a heightened level of awareness around, is service level. And service level, if I go back to my retail days, we can quantify that number. And service level would be the cases that you ship on time with the right packaging and the right labeling divided by the cases that they order. And so you need to think about what isn't the right number for that market that you want to sell into. So what is their expectation? If you're exporting within Canada and you're selling into one of the larger food retailers, their expectation for service level is probably going to be about 95, 96%. You need to understand what that is into any of the markets that you're exporting because service level is something that the retailers are very focused on, and there's a few reasons for that. They want to maximize their sales opportunities. So if they're giving you a space on the shelf, you need to keep it full. And also, if your product is out of stock and somebody is looking for it, they might lose that person across the street. So they're very focused on this, and it's a metric that you can both measure and does have a big impact on your relationship with your customers. So we would always encourage people to measure service level in your business all the time to each customer. How many of those orders are you filling on time and to the expectations of your customers? So certainly something that can have a big impact on the relationship. And one of the things which is always interesting when you talk about exporting is you are no longer local. And if you read the small print on those steps, that was a photo that I took in London. So when you're in London, England, local to them is products produced there, not something that is produced in Nova Scotia. So you have to think about that in terms of how you want to compete in the market and the message that you want to send to consumers and that kind of thing. Because a lot of times as brands or consumer packaged goods products grow, that's one thing that they call upon. But you're no longer local. So you are now something from a different market, and you have to find the attributes that resonate with consumers and make sure that you're doing things and saying things that are going to resonate and be relevant for them in that market. Sustainability is something that, depending on the market that you choose to export into, can have a big impact on your business and how your products are received. Some markets are very, very focused, and we see higher regulated sort of things happening on the shelf in terms of packaging or products and that kind of thing. So you need to understand the sustainability expectations of the markets you're going into. And when we look at sustainability, when we're talking to people about sustainability, we really think about it in three buckets. And I would encourage you to kind of explore the export market given these three buckets. The first one being your sort of environmental footprint. So what is happening from a logistics point of view, from a production point of view, that is your environmental footprint, and the reusable shopping bags there are sort of to illustrate that. The second component would be food waste, which we know is a huge issue in almost every market. So we need to think about how you can reduce that. And if that is part of your story to help position your products, whether it's if you're able to do something in sort of this trend of upcycling, or if you're able to reduce food waste in different ways, that can be something that resonates with consumers and customers. And then the third component is packaging. And packaging is something that is a huge challenge for all of you. And it's changing very quickly. But we know in some markets that there are regulations around the amount of compostable or recyclable and that kind of thing. So really encourage you to understand those components of sustainability. And as price has probably increased in importance to consumers in a lot of markets, given the food inflation that we've experienced, sustainability maybe is a little bit less. I saw some numbers from Nielsen a couple of weeks ago, which showed that sustainability had dropped a little bit in the consumer sort of ranking of attributes, but we know it's there. We know it's going to continue to be there. And it's actually something that's probably being driven as much by the regulatory environment as it is the consumer environment. So make sure you understand what the expectations are for your products and how it can impact your sales in the market too. And the next thing that we would encourage you to consider is e-commerce. And we know in Canada that probably between 12 and 15% of food and beverage is now purchased online when you consider people buying direct from producers and processors, and then also through the e-commerce platforms that Walmart would have, or Loblaw, or any of the other retailers, Amazon. So probably 12 to 15, but we also know if you're selling into markets like Asia, that number is probably closer to 30%. So it's important to understand how your product would be a fit in terms of that e-commerce environment. And if a third of the food and beverage is being purchased that way in certain markets, then how well does your product fit in that channel? And if it doesn't fit very well, are you kind of eliminating a third of the market because your product doesn't fit into that platform? So you really need to understand where they are positioned on e-commerce and how your product can be a fit in there. And it also can be an entry into a lot of markets, depending on how far you want to go. But certainly North America is realistic if you have a product that works within that channel. And so e-commerce is something to definitely understand and figure out, if you do fit there, how do you become on that platform and be available to people. And another thing when you're talking about sort of the alignment with the market is really understanding the changes that we've seen in recent years with consumers, what they're looking for, what they're focused on. So I have a picture here with sort of a combination of dairy milk and plant-based products. So we know that that's a category that's had a huge shift. So you really need to understand what are the changes going on with consumers in the market where you want to export. And they're different than here at home. So you need to spend some time in that market, learn about what consumers are looking for, what are the items where the retailers or the distributors are looking for products, and what are the categories where they're looking to maybe not expand or even contract some of the shelf space. So you really need to keep abreast of what's going on with the consumer in terms of that, what's interesting and what's important to them at the time. Obviously, food safety is something that's not negotiable in our industry anymore. So you need to know, what are the expectations of the customers in the market? So whether it's a distributor or retailer, what are their food safety expectations? And then also, what are the regulatory requirements? And sometimes those can be different. Sometimes a retailer will have a higher level of expectation for food safety. And especially if you're producing perhaps a private label product for them, which can be a great opportunity from an export perspective, because you don't have to do the sales and marketing piece. They do that for you. So if you're producing a product for Waitrose in the UK and it's a private label product, then they are doing a lot of the sales and marketing work for you, building the brand and that kind of thing. But you need to make sure you understand those food safety requirements because that can sometimes be something that takes a long time to implement in your business and also can be something that can require some investment. So make sure that you understand that. And one of the great things about our series here is we have some people coming up who are experts in that area and can give you some guidance in that as well. Another thing to think about when you're talking about alignment with customers in these markets is making sure that your packaging is right for the market, whether that's the nutrition facts table. And we know coming into Canada that there's specific regulations in this market. So it's the same when you go to other markets. You need to make sure that you've investigated that. And again, we have some people coming up in our series who are experts at labeling who are going to provide some great insights about some of these things and help you in that regard. But also shelf life is something to consider because now if you're exporting, there's transit times and different things can happen to products during that trip. So you need to really make sure that that shelf life is investigated and that you have enough time left on your product so that it will turn when it gets into the market where you want to sell. And it's not just that it has the right amount of days when it leaves your facility, but you need to think about once it gets through the supply chain into the market, how many days are left on that product, and is that acceptable to the consumer in that market? And again, sometimes that can be different. Some consumers are more accepting. We know in the UK there's been a lot of changes with regards to best before dates and that kind of thing. So make sure that you understand, what the sort of the environment is where you want to sell into. And the last thing in terms of alignment for us is just make sure that you are ready to sell into that channel from a systems and a process perspective. And so, obviously, the GTIN, that's something that goes around the world, but make sure that you're set up and that you can communicate, whether your customer is expecting some kind of an electronic data interchange or EDI connection to share purchase orders and confirm orders and that kind of thing. So make sure you've investigated what their expectations are. And there can be investments required to do that. These platforms are not cheap sometimes, and a lot of times related to volume. So you're paying per transaction, that kind of thing. So you want to make sure that you are understanding what the level of investment is that you need and that you have the capability to communicate with them electronically so that you have a good relationship with them. So those are the different things in terms of alignment. So maybe I'll just take a pause for a second and see if anybody's got any questions about sort of the consumer piece in terms of export and also the the alignment with the customers. So if anybody's got any questions, we just want to make this interactive. So jump in and ask away. Patricia, I see you got your hand up.
Good morning. Thank you,
Morning.
Peter. Yeah, Mike, when you were just talking about the having enough time for the turnaround
Hmm.
for shelf life, what is that typically? Like once it lands in the store,
Hmm.
how long do they want it to be able to stay on the shelf?
Yeah, I think it's so much a category by category answer. So I think for me that would say I want to go look and see what do I see in the market right now. So if you're in the say the cookie category and you go in and do a market and you see that most of the products have about 6 months on them, then I would say you've got to be there in that range. If it's a fresh produce item, obviously a lot shorter and they're going to be that becomes more of a subjective kind of look and based on some certain standards that they're going to set with you up front in terms of shipping and saying it needs to be this and this and this. So I would say that it depends on the category and then it's how you can make sure that it has at least that on it. And if you can find ways to do a little better, that can be a great point of differentiation because it reduces the risk for the person bringing the product into the market. And if they're used to products arriving with, say, I don't know, 3 months, and you can get to 4, then that reduces the risk a little bit too. All right, so I'm going to keep going and talk about this retail plan and appreciate the question. And as I said, we want to make these sessions interactive. So please, if you have things, by all means. Um, so this retail plan, and a lot of this depends on your relationship in with the people who are going to be buying your products in the market. So depending on how far you're going and the complexity of the supply chain you're selling into. So I'm approaching it from the point of view that you need to still be involved with the selling part of the product. Now, sometimes in export relationships, we're exporting to somebody and they take possession of the product, and then it's sort of their job to sell it once it gets into the market. But I'm just going to take the approach that you are going to continue to be more involved with the sales piece. So the first thing you need to understand when it comes to that retail plan is you really need to know your category. So understanding who you're going to compete against, what are the attributes of those products? So that picture there is actually from a Waitrose store in London. So if you're going to be trying to sell breakfast bars into that market, then you really need to know, okay, who's in that category now? What are they saying to the consumer? What are the different sort of pieces of their value proposition that we have to compete against? And that's really important so that you can have good conversations with the people who are going to sell the products. And also, if you have to build some sales and marketing pieces and that kind of thing, you need to be able to share the components of your value proposition that are going to resonate in the market. So the second thing you need to really understand is pricing. And this can be a tough thing to navigate through in export. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to share two models of pricing with you, and I would recommend that you do both. I think you need to do pricing two different ways to be effective. So the first method is what we would call cost-based pricing. So you're going to look at the cost in your business and you're going to kind of build it up to a price where you're going to sell your product. So I'll just take you through an example. But you really need to start with the cost of your product. So, the basic components of your product in terms of ingredients and packaging. And then you need to calculate also the cost of getting that product produced. So, the labor required, whatever costs you have for production. And then you need to have some margins built into your pricing to cover things like sales and marketing and overheads and distribution, administration, and hopefully deliver a profit as well. So for us, if we walk through kind of a basic example, and these are some pretty small numbers, I appreciate compared to maybe what some of you deal with, but at least it gives you kind of the basics of how to approach this. So if your ingredient costs are $2.10, it costs 50 cents for packaging, and then we've got another 40 cents for labor and the same 40 cents for production there. So you can see what it's sort of 260 plus another 80 cents. That's your per unit cost to get that product produced and packaged. And then if we want to build in for sales and marketing, a 30% margin, the same thing, a 25% for distribution. And again, these numbers can change depending on where you're going and what category you're selling into, but we're just giving you an example. We put some money in there, 5% for admin and 10% for profit. So if you want to look at the math, to do this, you want to look at your product cost and your production cost, and then you want to divide that by 100% minus the margin that we built in for each of those components. So you can see the cost about $3.40 per unit, and then you take 100% minus those margins. So 100 or the $3.40 divided by 30%. So you would need to sell that product for $11.33, and that would give you money built in for sales and marketing, distribution, some admin costs, and some profit. And again, you can change those numbers depending on what your expectations will be for the market you're going to sell into. So based on that sort of building it up, you would want to sell your product for about $11.33. And that's important. You need to understand your costs. You need to know what it's costing you to do this and sell into these markets. But you can't do your pricing in a silo. You need to do your pricing also thinking about the market where you're going to sell into. So that's why we would look at another option, which we would refer to as category-based pricing. So this is where we would start with a category review. We would look at what's going on in the market. we would think about what is the right price for our product based on who we're competing against, based on the attributes of our products, based on the attributes of the competing products. Then we would think about the margin that the retailer is making, and then we would say, okay, this is the price that we need to sell our product for. So I'm going to give you an example, or first of all, I'll share some margins, and this would be relevant if you're selling into other provinces in Canada, sort of retailer margins. Now, if you're selling into a different export market, you need to understand what those margins are. And, from my perspective, that's always a fair question, what the retailer expectations for margin should be. So those are numbers that you need to understand selling into those markets. So here's the math for the category-based pricing. So if we looked at our category, and we're trying to figure out what price should we sell into that market for, so we would look at our retail. What retail do we believe the product should be set at? Then we would multiply that by 1 minus the gross margin that the retailer needs to make. So in this case, we looked at the category. We said, okay, we believe our product should sell for $19.99, and the margin that the retailer needs is 45%. So you would see 1 minus the 0.45. So you would multiply that retail price, $19.99 times 0.55. So that means you would need to sell that product into the retailer for $10.99. So in our example, if you go back to our cost-based pricing model, we said you would need to sell that for $11.33. And then in our category-based pricing model, we're saying the retailer only wants to pay $10.99. So that's where you need to start to do some work and say, okay, either could the product sell for a little more so we could charge $11.33, or are there some things in our cost model that we can shave back so that we can get it down closer to $11? And that's the kind of work that we recommend that you do, because you can't just go with your price based on your cost. You need to understand what the product will sell for in the market and find a common ground. And that's when your pricing will work for you. But you need to make sure that you know your cost and what it's costing to sell into these markets. The next thing that you need to have is, if you're going to be selling into them, is you need to have the ability to promote your products and create demand for your products. So you need to have what we call marketing spend, which is the ability to talk direct to the consumers. So that could be social media, could be mass media, could be public relations. There's different things you can do in every market to create that relationship with consumers and create demand for your products. And that's one of the biggest challenges when it comes to exporting, is if they haven't heard of you before, then you need to help them understand what your product is all about, what the benefits are to them if they want to buy it. So and again, it goes back to that target market, is understanding who these people are and how you're going to find them. And if it's social media, are you going to find them on TikTok or Facebook or Instagram or other platforms? How are you going to connect with these people in the marketplace? So you need to have some built into your pricing to do that marketing spend. And then the next piece is what we would call trade spend. So this is the money you invest with the retailer to sell your product. So these could be in-store specials. So if you wanted to sell into that category, and I can't remember what store that was in, it was a store in an export market. But if you want to sell into that, you can see they've got signs up there for, special this week or whatever. So you're probably going to have to fund some of those investments. So you need to have some money built into your pricing for what we would call trade spend. And those could be discounts to your product. It could be demos in the store. It could be signage in the store. There's lots of different ways you can make investments with the retailer to drive sales and drive awareness. Another thing you need to really understand when it comes to building that retail plan is merchandising. How are your products going to be merchandised? So if you look at the photo we have there, almost every one of those products are what we would call case-ready merchandising. So all they have to do is tear the top or the side off that case, your shipping case, and put it into their shelf. And that's actually a Lidl store. So more into the discount segment. So obviously low labor. So they want things really easy. So you just tear it off and you put it into the case, and that's how they want to merchandise their product. If you were to go to more of a conventional or full service store, then they may have that product displayed very differently. So you want to think about what are the merchandising pieces that are, how do they want to merchandise your products in the store, because it can impact your packaging and your case pack and those kind of things. So you have to investigate that and understand. And another big part of export is distribution. So sometimes it can be very complicated to get your product into the market, and you need to think about those different legs. And we actually have one of our sessions next week dedicated to logistics and distribution. So we've got some great people here who have some great knowledge in that area and can help you understand some of those components, and also resources, because it can be complicated doing this. So we have that, but you just need to make sure also that you've got enough built into your pricing to manage that distribution piece. And when you think about all these different things you have to do to be successful in export, you really have to make sure that you execute on these things. And for me, that sort of takes me back to something that happened a few years back. I was flying to Toronto, and actually I had some samples with me for a client that we were working on, and it was actually a beverage product. And the client had packed them into a styrofoam cooler for me to take on the plane, like to check as luggage and take in to the prospective customer. So I got to the WestJet counter, and the person working there, they said, "Oh, sorry, you can't check that styrofoam cooler. They break too easily on the plane. So you're going to have to put that in a cardboard box." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I'm sure most of you know, in the Halifax airport, you walk down the hallway and there's Clearwater Lobster. So I thought, okay, well, I know they have boxes at Clearwater where they pack for travel. So I went into Clearwater, and there was a person working there, and it was quite early in the morning, like 7:15 or something, not exactly sort of prime lobster buying time. And the person is in there like this. So I said, "Morning," explained my little dilemma. I said, I'd like to buy one of your boxes." And the person behind the counter is, "We don't sell the boxes." And I said, "Okay, I'm happy to buy it from you, $10 or whatever it is. Like, whatever it is, you just tell me. I just need to get this done so I can take these samples with me on the plane." And the person goes, "We don't sell the boxes. It has our brand on it." And I'm like, "Well, isn't the purpose of that so that I take it on the plane and people see your brand somewhere, and that's a good thing for you?" And then they said, "We'd have to charge you a $15 packing fee." And I'm like, okay, so now I'm getting mad. And to be honest, seafood was one of my departments at Loblaw that I looked after. I know people who work at Clearwater, and I was getting really frustrated. So I turned around. I was like, "Take it easy, Peter." I turned around and I walked across the hall, and there's Hudson News. And for me, Hudson News was kind of the home of the $8 package of gum and a $15 magazine. It was sort of not a place that I frequented that often. So I went in, and there's a person working behind the counter. I said good morning, and I always remember her name is Emily. I still see her at the airport when I go through now. She's still working there. And I explained my problem, and she says to me, "Oh, no problem. We've got cardboard boxes. We just emptied a bunch of stuff. I'll call down to my colleague, and I'll get one for you, no problem." So they brought me a box. They put my stuff in it. She helped me. She gave me some tape. We taped it all up. And then she said, "Oh, no, here's a marker. You got to put your name on that so they don't lose it." And really helped me out, and took kind of a miserable situation and made it a good one. So when I went in and checked, in at the gate upstairs to get on my flight, I thought, "Oh, Peter, you should send a note to Hudson News, because Emily really was nice to you and sort of took a crappy situation, made it a lot better. So you should sort of maybe acknowledge that somehow." So I found the Hudson News website, sent them a little email, explained what happened, and sent it off. Figured that was the end of it. So within minutes before my flight leaves, I get an email back, and it's from Hudson News, and it says, "Peter, really wanted to take a moment to express our appreciation for sharing your story with Emily at the Halifax airport." So I knew it was like a real email. It wasn't like a robot sending me a note back. And one of the things it said in there was, It said, our brand promise at Hudson News is to be the traveler's best friend. And obviously, Emily was doing that for you today. And so when I thought about that, I'm like, okay, wow, like that is executing on your brand promise. So for those of you who want to export, and there's all these different things you need to do, you want to make sure that the people within your business understand what you're trying to do and that they have the ability to deliver on those things. So if your brand promise is a certain thing, with your products to a certain market, then make sure your people have the ability to execute on that and that they can deliver when there's questions or people contact your business or whatever. So it's just something to think about, but you really do need to execute well if you're going to be successful in this business. And as I mentioned off the top, we talk about consumers, we talk about alignment with the customer in the market, with the retailer, with the distributor. Then we talk about that retail plan. And those are all functional things that you need to do in your business if you want to be successful in this industry. But the last thing that for me is what's going to get you the second, third, fourth order is when you can build up a level of trust. And my experience has been that the best business relationships are the ones where you have a level of trust. And if I go back to my days at Loblaw, there were certain suppliers where I felt like I had that level of trust and that we could have a prosperous relationship for both companies. But then there were other ones where I really didn't get that. And I probably didn't call them with opportunities or different things because I just didn't feel that that level of trust was there. So I want to share one more story with you that kind of illustrates that. And it's a level of trust that actually that relationship continues to this day with the two businesses. I'm not there anymore, but the level of trust is still there, obviously. So, and when you're working to export into markets, I think you need to think about trust and how you can build that level of trust with the other people in the value chain. So it takes me back to my days with Lawn and Garden. So Lawn and Garden was one of the departments I looked after. And at the time, we had probably about 12 different suppliers for bedding plants in Atlantic Canada, which was way too many. We just couldn't manage the program. We had too many different things going on. So in the retailer language, we needed to rationalize our listing base, rationalize our vendors, which is a polite way of saying we were going to get rid of some vendors. But we had to do it. We couldn't manage that many different suppliers. So Peter Cantley and Peter looked after Lawn and Garden nationally. So we had decided we were going to go around, visit all of our suppliers, talk to them about the changes and tell them, there were certain ones we were going to continue with and other ones where we were going to say, look, we just don't have room in the program. So we went to one of the people supplying us, and they were only supplying 2 or 3 stores at the time, so they were pretty small. And we kind of felt like, they weren't going to be part of the future of the program. So we drove and got off the highway in Stewiacke and went down a few country roads and across a bridge, which we didn't know if we were going to get across, and drove into their lot. And this is what we saw when we went in. We saw these small greenhouses with actually a lot of them had furnaces from like a house in them for heating. And we were kind of like, okay, well, this is going to be a pretty quick conversation because obviously, this is a pretty tough facility to grow great product and supply our big, beautiful Loblaw stores. So we were kind of looking around and we couldn't find the people who owned the greenhouse. We had never met them. So their dogs were there, but we couldn't find them. So we sort of poked around a little bit and we went into one of the greenhouses and we saw unbelievable product. Like we're looking at this product and we're like, holy smokes, this is great stuff. And then we started looking at the hanging basket mixes and we're like, holy cow, like look at the great mixes that they're producing. And Peter, who like I said, looked after the program nationally, he's like, yeah, these are better than what we're doing. Like the way that they've got the color combinations and if any of you've ever tried to grow hanging baskets, you got to get stuff that grows at the same rate. One can't take over another and that kind of thing. It's not an easy thing to do well. So we're looking and we're like, wow. Anyway, so the people show up and we introduce ourselves and they didn't really know why we were there. and they're saying, we wanted to talk to you about our business. We'd like to actually expand. And we're kind of looking at each other going, holy smokes, this is not good. They want to expand, and we want to tell them we don't need their product. And so then they started to talk to us about consumers buying lawn and garden products at grocery stores. And they're telling us all these things, and we're like, holy smokes, like you people you're into this. Like you do have a pretty good idea of what's going on out there. And then they started talking to us about our President's Choice program, and they had some really fantastic ideas. And we're almost sort of looking like, okay, we need to tell these people to stop, because we're there to tell them we don't want to do business anymore. They're telling us things that are actually really good learning, but it's not fair to do that if we're not going to do business with them. So we kind of said, can you just stop for a second? Like, where do you see all this going? And they're like, well, our daughter's in her last year at Dow. She wants to take over the business. We really think that there's opportunities to do more with you, and we'd like to talk about that. And we're kind of like, so we looked around a little more and we said, okay, we do need to talk to these people. Like we can't, they're doing too good of a job for us to say, well, you're small. We don't want to keep working with you. So we said to them, why don't you think about, what you could do for our stores? We're going to give you 2 weeks, and we'll come back, and then we'll have a conversation, and we'll just figure out what the future looks like. So we went back 2 weeks later, sat down at their kitchen table, and the first thing I saw was a big map of the Maritimes with all of our stores all over it, with push pins in each location and distribution routes drawn out. And so they talked to us again about consumers and about how they saw consumers were changing and where they saw the opportunities being to get people interested in more buying at, the parking lot of a grocery store for a garden center. Then they talked to us about different opportunities with our President's Choice program and different pot thing combinations that they thought we could try, different hanging baskets that they wanted to try that they felt would be good sellers in our locations. They talked about this whole distribution network. They'd figured out how to get to us 3 times a week in each store, which is really important in that category to have fresh and keep product turning. Weather plays such a big role. So they talked about all that. And we're like, okay, we need to have you as a supplier for us. So if you were to go back there today, this is what you would see. And because of building up that level of trust and them really understanding consumers and that alignment with the retailer and helping us build what that retail plan could be, they built a great relationship with that business, and they were able to reinvest in their business. And then we made some more changes where we gave them the poinsettia business and the Easter business so they could keep their staff working 12 months of the year. And they export to several provinces now as part of their relationship with that retailer. So when you can get that level of trust built up between the two businesses, then there's some great opportunities and great things that can happen. But it takes time, it takes a lot of work, and it takes you understanding their business and them also wanting to work with you. So there are definitely opportunities out there, but it takes a lot of work to be able to seize them and take advantage of them. So again, I just always want to remind you that success is not just about having a great product to sell, it's about selling the great product you have. And there's a lot of work that comes into selling it, and it's not all fun work. I'll tell you, it can be a challenge doing some of that work. So, but in the end, if you can develop these prosperous business relationships, it can be a great help to your business. So that's the approach we like to take. Focus on the consumer first. You really need to understand who's going to be buying that product and why they're going to buy. Then you need to develop that relationship with the customer, that alignment piece. Make sure you know what's important to them. What are they focused on? How are they trying to compete in the market? It's your job as a supplier to support them in that. So try to understand them and how they're going to market. Then make sure you've got that plan built in. And depending on the level of involvement you're going to have, as I said, sometimes you're exporting a commodity and it really goes to somebody and then they take care of selling it, or it can be your consumer packaged good that sells right through to the end user. So make sure that you understand what you need built into that retail plan, and then work on trust. And that, again, for me, is how you get the future orders is when you develop that level of trust. So that's our sort of approach to this. Hope that it was helpful to you, that you were able to get some good insights into what you need to do. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer some right now. I'll stop sharing my screen and we can just have a chat. If anybody's got any questions, and fire away. That's why I'm here. No questions. Well, hopefully that means we get some good information. Oh, Patricia, yeah, go ahead.
Great information. Thank you. Uh, I have a question. Do you ever work with sales in other categories entirely, like that aren't even food, or do you always stay in food?
It's always been in food. I sort of felt like, what we talk about applies to other things. I mean, whether you're talking
Yeah.
about
Okay.
windows or
Yeah.
something, yes, the premise should apply. But my work's always been in food, so food and beverage. So I try to, I guess I would tell you, focus on what you're good at. So if I'm good at food, then that's where I should focus. So I do see there's a question in the chat there, so that's great. Thanks. Do I need insurance to sell produce in stores? What type of insurance? How much should be the insurance? So again, that would be really a customer by customer requirement. If you're going to sell into some of the larger retailers in Canada, I believe now that they would be asking you probably for $5 million of general liability insurance. So that would be their expectation. So you would want to make sure you understand that. But again, it's a customer by customer decision. And I think if you see potential in different markets or different retailers, that's a question you want to ask early on so that you can get those things in place. And also, I do know that if you are selling into the bigger retailers here, they would expect that you have an insurance certificate that names them, so that they are named on from your insurance company, so that it expressly says, doing business with Costco or Sobeys or somebody like that. But an important part, and insurance is something that as you export, there's different levels of insurance that you can dive into in terms of while your product is in transit to a market. So you definitely want to explore that. It can add costs to it, but also reduces the risk because things happen. Containers fall off ships. Things freeze. There's different things that can happen. So you definitely do want to explore that component of it. And if anybody's got any other questions for me, I'll be around for all the sessions. So if you think of something and you want to say, Peter, what about this? I'm here and happy to always answer them. So I'll be here and can answer them for you. So what we'd like to do now is move into the second segment for today's session. And I'm really looking forward to this. I know I'm going to learn a lot, so I'm excited. We're happy to have Maria Bartlett here from Invest Nova Scotia. And Maria's there she is. Welcome. Good to see you.
Good morning.
And now I even can share that I know, not because I know, but because I asked earlier that that's Port Hawkesbury, or just outside Port Hawkesbury in the background, right, Maria?
Yes,
Yeah.
it sure is. Yes, going on a little trip this morning.
Beautiful, beautiful. So Maria's spent 2 decades working in the public and private sector in roles that focus on designing and developing the customer experience. And originally from PEI, now living in Halifax, but also Maria spent the last 15 years in Queensland, Australia. So awesome to get some insights into that market. Maria worked at the State Tourism Organization, managing a customer experience benchmarking program in Australia. And she currently manages Invest Nova Scotia's Trade Marketing Intelligence Service, which helps Nova Scotia companies access critical market and trade intelligence to help export opportunities specific to their products, services, and markets of interest. So I'm really excited to learn about some trends and different things happening in different markets. So Maria, welcome, and I'll turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Peter. And thank you everyone for joining us today. Just bear with me while I share my screen. I was saying I'm a bit of a pro when it comes to Teams, but Zoom is my, I feel like a rookie. So hopefully that is displaying for everyone now. Yes, I'm getting some nods. Thanks,
All
Yulia.
good.
Excellent. Perfect. So I'm joining you today to talk a little bit about global trends in the food and beverage sector. So I will preface this by, these are predominantly led from a consumer mindset, because ultimately that's where our product goes. And I think it's really great to build on what Peter said earlier, understanding in that CART framework that the customer is a key component when we're looking at getting our products in their baskets. So today, I'm going to approach this session. Oh, that didn't work. There we go. And then I'm kind of set the scene. So what is the food and beverage look like holistically? And then I'm going to dive into some key global trends that we're seeing in this market, once again, based on that consumer mindset. What's ahead, and then how can we help, particular here at Invest Nova Scotia? So getting right into it, global food supply, it's big, like it's big. $1.7 trillion is the current value of the global food trade market, and that's based off some statistics from the UN Trade and Development Organization. Interestingly enough, that size, as big as it is, has grown almost 350% in the last 20 years. We're currently, if you're looking at how it fits globally in that, I guess, merchandising mindset, is about 8%. And I guess the way to look at that is some of the food and beverage products, they are low cost, but doesn't mean that the quantity itself is not grand. So $1.7 trillion in value in that global trade. So this next slide, there's a lot of color here, but ultimately what you're looking at is the breakdown of different types of food or food categories that sit in that importing market. So I'll also talk about export, but if we're looking at import as an example, on the graph on the left, you can see that growth from 1995 up to 2021. So the main growth area came from raw products. So those are things like your grains, your fruit, your vegetables, anything that doesn't require any processing, it is shipped as it is. So that's one of the main growth areas. The other area would be around composites. So thinking about your fats and your oils. So really interesting to see the growth that happened in those particular areas. There's still growth in the other segments, but just interesting to note that the vast majority of that 350% growth they've seen across the segments have come from those two. And flipping it on the other side, from an export perspective, it's pretty much exactly reflective, which is obviously no surprise when you think import export, but just an interesting thing to call out, thinking about where your products may sit in that growth, knowing that we're playing in a global space. We do talk about locally and what's happening in our local shops, but sometimes there is that competition, thinking more broadly about markets that sit beyond our own. So with that in mind, thinking back to Nova Scotia, who are our key trade partners? So if you're looking at from a global perspective, and this is based on value, so that's the value of the products that are going in and out, our key trading partners are the US, and that's no surprise. That's proximity, that's ease of access, just across the border, hop on a plane, hop on a boat. So US, China, France, India, Japan, as you can see the list there. Interesting to note, the Indo-Pacific region is getting some prevalence as well in the market, with India, Japan, South Korea coming in on that top 10 list. So I guess that's one thing to note. There's our bread and butter markets here domestically, as in North America, and then abroad in that area as well. And then to the right, you can see the sectors that fall into the food and beverage categories that are also the key trading partners or key trading products with those markets. And once again, that's by value. So no surprise when you think about what we have on offer here in the province. The next slide is drilling down into the US, because I think that's an important place to play, because that's often where we have our first sort of exploration into the export market. You kind of dabble into outside Nova Scotia, Atlantic Canada, across Canada, and then we look into the States, and each of them can, in reality, be considered almost their own country based on their size and their market makeup. But interesting here to note that Massachusetts, that's across the border, so there's ease in that, but all the way down to Michigan as well as number 10. In regards to the food and products, also based on value, no real surprise there in the mix, but it just is interesting to see what types of products we are looking at with trade. So I just wanted to set the scene of noting that the food and beverage industry is huge, it's big, and we have lots of diverse countries and regions that we are currently exporting with, and that may continue as well. So the next section is around global trends. And as I noted before, this is really around the consumer mindset. So I've highlighted 6 key global trends. And the way I'm going to present each of these in the following slides kind of has the same bit of a process. One is going to talk about what is it? What is she on about? What is the core makeup of this trend? What are the consumers saying? So I have a couple of stats, and I try to mix it up as well as to where those stats are coming from. So looking at different markets, so it could be North America, it could be the UK, it could be in our Asian countries as well, just to demonstrate that these are broader than our own backyard. The third piece that I'll highlight is how companies can approach that. So what is the opportunity that those trends are presenting for companies before giving you a couple of examples? Because it's always really handy to see, okay, we know that's a trend, but what can I even do with that? And what has someone done with it that's been successful? So I think it's always interesting to have that approach. So I will do that for each of the 6 trends. So
Maria?
yes, definitely.
Maria, I see there's a question there from Patricia. So I was just
sorry,
before you get
Patricia.
into that next segment, I figured
Not
I'd
worries. Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm split screening, so you'll have to
Yep.
bear with me if I miss something. So thank you. Just please jump in. So yes, Patricia, over to you.
Thanks, Maria. I suffered a bit of a head injury a number of months ago, and I find it hard to keep up. And I'm just wondering if you might be able to just slow down just a little bit in your talking. It doesn't have to be slow, but you have so much rich content, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't keep up. So
yes.
if you don't mind, I would really appreciate it. And I thank you.
Not a worries at all, Patricia. And sorry, I should do that now. I've been told before that I do talk fast. And the more excited I get, it's almost like someone has just presses fast forward. So I do apologize. I will definitely slow down. And if you find me doing it again, please jump in. Because as I said, I get enthusiastic and then I feel as though my speed increases. So you're not alone. So
Maria, there are 2 questions in the chat.
Yep.
One of them is for a slide that was a bit early about the top 10 markets. Can you please comment on the dollar value of exports for each of these markets?
I can, yes. So is an indication. So is this the slide that you were referring to? So I can't actually see the chat, just in the way that my thing has split. But was it the markets, like as in the countries?
I think that's when the question appeared.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Is that what you were asking about?
Yes, yeah. That's
Thank you.
That's right.
Thanks, Govid. Sorry about that. Yes. So in regards to the top trading partners, as an indicator, I'll give you an example for the US. So this is in Canadian dollars. So this comes from Statistics Canada. It's based on border statistics. So for the US, the value of that particular market in 2023 was $4.3 billion. Sorry, I just had to make sure I counted my decimals correctly in that instance. So yeah, so the US was 4.3 billion. China was 772 million. France sat at 110 million. India, 106 million. I don't know if you keep wanting to keep going down, but I guess indicative that the US is a proportion. If you're looking at that 4.3 billion in comparison to China is the number 2, sitting at 722. So that really just demonstrates, I guess, the size of the US market in that instance. So if we're looking across to the industry, so fishing is an example. So it's interesting to note, or I should call out here specifically, that fishing in the food and beverage is number 1, but it's also number 1 in all categories. So if we're going beyond just food and beverage, fishing also sits as the number 1 traded product. And the value of that one also in Canadian dollars is 1.3 million. And then if you're looking at the second one as an example, seafood, sorry, I just have to move.
Must be billion, was it, Maria?
Oh, very well.
1.3 billion it must be.
Fishing.
It says so it's the note that I have here, and I'll have to come back to you because sometimes it has the in thousands or there's an extra thing depending on the table, and I did not unfortunately pull that across. So in the note I have I'll read the full number, 1,302,529. So it's very possible. So I apologize about that. I should have made that extra note. I'll come back to you on that clarity because that's an easy one for me to double check. But with that same assumption, knowing that the dollars are equal in number 2. So if it is million, it'll be the same, but I'll say it as though it's million just to ensure that there's the consistency across the 2 numbers. So for seafood as a number 2, it actually sits number 3 overall if you're looking at all products and categories across the market. So seafood product preparations and packaging sits at 1,108,000. So that just slightly about 200,000 behind fishing. And then so for the third one, that frozen food manufacturing, interestingly enough, that sits, it's 3rd overall for food and beverage products. If we're looking at all categories that are exported from Nova Scotia to these countries, it sits as number 5, and that is at 185,000. So there is quite a gap between the the main industry there in the third. And then the fourth one I'll just give as an example is what bread and bakery products. So that currently here sits as number 4, but in that holistic export products sits at number 12 and the value of 59,407. So does that give you a little bit of an understanding? So you can tell our number ones are definitely strong in regards to value in Canadian dollars. And I will seek some clarity on the billion, as I noted that might have just been the way I pulled that across. But there is some really interesting size comparisons between those.
Thank you, Maria. And the second question from Anu Gupta, I think it refers to one of the further slides. I don't see any beverage in the list. Is there a list for that?
Yeah, it's interesting that there wasn't a specifically one from beveraging. It just didn't come into the top list, unfortunately, because the list that I pulled was based on the top 25 products from Nova Scotia as exports. So that was all categories. And in that particular instance, outside milk production, there wasn't anything that specifically called out beverages. So it is pulled into the list. It just, in this instance, didn't hit the value mark.
Thank you.
I had a question, Maria.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Peter.
When it comes to these like slide 6 and 7, which I think are so valuable for people, is it possible to break down the markets and look at the products by market? Because seafood does influence, like it skews things so much in Nova Scotia with the value of it. So if somebody's in a different segment of food and beverage, is it possible to look at what's going, say, to the United Kingdom, for example, and say, okay, there's so much in other categories as well?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Peter. And so Trade Data Online, so that's the source on the bottom of the slide, I have to say is a great resource. If you haven't been there before, I highly recommend going and having a look. It's free to access and it's based off of exactly that trade data, so statistical data. So in that instance, let's say I wanted to understand, I'm just going to pick one randomly here, Japan. What are the top markets in Japan? I can look at it a couple of different ways if I'm in that particular platform. So I can look at it as understanding holistically what are all the segments that happen in that market, or I can look specifically to mine and drill down. So it does it by NAICS codes and HS codes as well, if that's of interest. But yeah, there's a couple of different ways that you can find that information. So yes, Trade Data Online is a wonderful gift, and there's a lot of insights, and you can play in there for all day if you really wanted to, I'm sure of it. But the answer to your question is yes, you can drill down to your product and understand. So as that example of food and beverage, you could look into a market if you were interested in understanding where food and beverage sat from an export perspective in Nova Scotia to the US, or even to a particular state. You can use that platform to understand that particular piece of information. Yeah, so the exercise here was really just to demonstrate, I guess, holistically what are we looking at, but you can definitely drill down into that level of detail. Is that all good? Excellent. Thanks, team. Whoops, I double-clicked, but that worked. So I guess just to reiterate on the global trends, we're going to talk about, this is from the consumer landscape. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about what the trends are. What are the consumers saying that, I guess, really reiterate this particular trend? What could businesses do to support that trend? And then a couple of examples of businesses who are playing in that landscape. So with that in mind, we can jump right into the first one. So the first trend is hybrid harvest. And this is just really talking about the role that technology plays. And it plays a huge role, and it'll continue to grow as we continue to expand and invest in new opportunities in regards to the technology landscape. I mean, Peter talked about it earlier, looking at delivery and e-commerce. Those are huge platforms, and they're driven by technology, but they've changed the world and how we eat and how we share food with our friends and with new countries and new markets. So I think it's just one to keep an eye out for. And I suppose in the same vein, while we're looking at technology, it's important not to forget that food's important to people. There's a personal connection that people have with food. Food can be an identity, could be part of a culture. They could consume food because that's what their family did, and it's a part of bringing a community together. It could also be functional. So there's so many different relationships that people have with food that it's important when we do introduce something new that we don't forget that, that we're mindful of the consumer, and that we are mindful that they want that convenience and the comfort of, I guess, consistency is not the right word, but they just want it to be true to what the food is that they have. So that kind of ties into that authentic automation. So be mindful of, when we're introducing these new things, that we're not just doing it because we can, but we're doing it to make it better. We're adding benefit to the consumer, whether that is through the online platforms like for delivery, or ensuring that, we're bundling things based on curiosity points that they have. If they're searching for a particular item on the website, AI actually allows the platform itself to promote an alternative product or additional suggestions. If you'd like this, then you may like this. We see that quite often when you're on platforms like Amazon or any sort of other shopping environment. So I guess those are two things to keep in mind when we're having technology as part of the conversation, that it's not the only piece, but it works in tandem with the nature and the products that we are having. And it's about bringing customers on that journey. So if you are introducing something new, it's telling them why, what are the benefits, what is the opportunity that they themselves can see as a result of having technology as part of their food journey. So to give you an idea of, I guess, the appetite for technology and food from a consumer's mindset, I have a couple different stats here. So the first ones are really around how people understand the role that technology can play in the betterment of themselves, the food, and the world. So this first example, a Brazilian consumer, 47% of them agree that technology can help us live more sustainability. They understand the role that, technology, but through efficiencies, can help us hit our targets, whether it's through emissions or through the sustainable crop development that happens with the technologies that are used in that harvesting. Another interesting thing here is around the new things, the inventions that can come from technology. And that could be from whether it's the modifying the ingredients or the processes. So in this example, Chinese consumers, they would be interested in trying food and beverage that has been genetically modified if it is something that can withstand extreme heat and extreme climates, because they're understanding that that is the world that we may be facing in the future. So they're open to the possibility. And the same with the US vegetable buyers. They will eat vegetables engineered if they're more nutritious. So that's really demonstrating the benefits. And I think that's just a really key piece to play when we're talking about this hybrid harvest. It's not one or the other. They're in tandem. There's the value of both and collectiveness. And so I think that's just something to be mindful of. And the same with the Italian consumers. They also see that, food and beverages containing modified ingredients, they're okay with it as long as they understand how the product was made. So that ties into that communication piece. And honestly, it actually flies back to what Peter was saying earlier around trust. If they trust you as a knowledgeable source and having their best intentions in mind, and they understand why the activities or, issues have been included, then they're definitely keen to give something a go. If we're looking at what that looks like from a business, there's opportunity for experimentation. With technology, you can create something new. It could be through that genetic modification, or it could be through a process. You can identify new products, and the customers are open to that newness. There's also the opportunity for personalized experiences. I mentioned before about the online platform prompting recommendations. So if you have an online shop front, and you find someone's navigating or looking for a specific food type that has, something about sweet and convenience, or they really like snacks, then your website can promote additional snacks that are in line with what it is they're looking for. So we're using the technology and the data that we have on them to help us make it more personal for them, to give them that comfort that we talked about earlier. And there was a survey done, and they're seeing that businesses and professionals are identifying that generative AI it's all around us. It's been all around us. And there's many opportunities now for us to incorporate it into new ways of business. If you think about ChatGPT, it's probably one of the most utilized platforms. I think they said about 100 million users have used ChatGPT in the first 2 months. So there is avenues for us to have these streamlined efficiencies, but it's about bringing the customer along that journey with us to ensure that there's comfort and clear messaging around it as well. So to give you a couple of examples of who's doing this hybrid harvest environment. So the first one I have here is Driscoll's. And what they've done is they've actually created a new type of strawberry. They've taken 2 very sweet strawberries, they genetically modified it into a new version called the sweetest batch. So this is low yield, so that is something to be mindful, but they have identified a palate. Their customers wanted sweetness, and so they took the 2 sweetest and made a super sweet product. And they've reaped the rewards as a result of that, because they have put it at a premium position in regards to the product, and they've seen benefits as a result. The second example is it's different, but what they've done, Coke, is they've actually created this product using generative AI, predicting what consumers what they may see or envision as an optimal taste in the year 3000. So what would a a consumer in 3000 think is a taste of euphoria? What are the flavors? What are the consistency on that palate that they'd be interested in? So they use generative AI to help predict that, and they created this particular product. So that's just a fun little unique way, I'd say. And the third example here is Thrive. So Thrive is a plant-based product, and they're using faba beans. So faba beans is that sustainable, they're believed to be one of the more sustainable foods moving forward, just because of the benefits it provides to the earth in which it's harvested from. So that's an example of an alternative food product that can benefit long-term as climate change. It continues to change. So that's just an interesting example of hybrid harvests. That duality, I suppose you would say, between the food and the nature, and for customers. The next example is rural rebellion. And this, to be honest, is probably my favorite one. It's really about embracing the idea of being imperfect and perfectly imperfect, being okay with being average. It's around setting new expectations for yourself and realistic expectations of self, and owning who you are and what it is that you like and why you like it. So I think there's that in itself, is you can see it bubbling over in things that people are purchasing, including food and beverage. So the idea of indulgences or snacks, or, they may be on a diet, but they want a little treat for themselves because they deserved it. They had a hard day. And that also ties into delightful distractions. So if you think about COVID-19, people were locked up and they had to follow rules, and it was important to follow those rules to save lives. And it came to a point where they also just needed a distraction from the scary alternative that was existing in their future. So I think there's an opportunity for businesses and products to really tap into being that source of joy for people when they are in that mindset of just a little bit overwhelmed by stress and anxiety. And the third piece here is called the dopamine menu. I'm not sure if has anybody heard of a dopamine menu before? Just out of curiosity? No? I also love this. So dopamine menu, I'm sure you're familiar with, is basically your body's happy drug. When you're happy, your body sends off dopamine and it makes you feel better. So the idea of a dopamine menu, and this is really driven, I think, predominantly from social media, but it's building your own dopamine menu. So if you're feeling blue or if you're feeling overwhelmed, you go to your dopamine menu for a bit of hit of dopamine to feel better. And that dopamine menu doesn't have to be food, but many times it is. So it could be going for a walk for an hour. It could be going out to dinner with your friends. It could be going to a movie. It could be having a chocolate, like a chocolate cookie. It could be having your favorite tea. But it basically is, depending on the time that you have, you choose it from this menu that you know will make you feel better. So the opportunity for businesses is to be on someone's dopamine menu. So when they're feeling blue, they pick that apple that's from down the road that they know is super juicy and will just make them smell of home and feel like home. So I think that's just something to be mindful of thinking about how do you be the distraction or connect with that person when they're feeling, they have a certain feeling that they want to experience. That product could be that experience for them. So thinking about some stats about how this rural rebellion plays, in the US, 73% of consumers say it's okay to be average. I kind of love that as a statement. It's okay to be average. Maybe average is the new perfect. And so it's just resetting our mindset is, what is this sense of ideal? So knowing that people are okay to try new things because it's okay to be different. And you look like Germany here as an example. On a daily basis, 34% of them eat something indulgent, whether it's a dessert or a treat. And I say you shall. I think we all deserve a little treat or something indulgent at the end of the day. New foods and flavors. It's not about trying the same, it's about trying new things. So there is that element of comfort in regards to the dopamine menu, but there's also ways of sometimes the exhilaration that happens from something new. It could also be that joy hit that they're looking for. So in China, as an example here, the Chinese consumers, 63% are looking for something new. They're looking for a new flavor, and they're keen to try it. Same with the UK consumers. They're also interested in trying combinations. So it's not just about having the same type of tea. It could be a new type of blend, or a product that they really like has partnered with a different product, and then they created something new that they've never seen or thought they would ever try before. But because they've trusted that brand, they're interested in trying something new. So there's a couple of different ways you can kind of take this rural rebellion. There's a sense of comfort, but then there's that sense of newness as well. So from a business perspective, how can you tap into this? An example could be emotional marketing. And what I mean by that is, if someone's looking for an escape, or they want to feel indulgent, or if they're looking for that imperfect distraction, that could be you. And it's about connecting in with that business with that consumer, and understanding how your business meets that need. It could be about creating memorable moments. An example of this could be products or the packaging that you use for your product. And maybe the memorable moment is how they do the unboxing. That's another social media trend that you see bubbling up, that people just get really excited about the beautiful packaging, the scents, the handwritten note that's in the box dedicated to you, that's personalized, that makes you feel special. And it's created a memorable moment between that consumer and you as the business. And the other way to look at it too is product innovation. That sense of newness, that sense of trying something new to get that dopamine hit. There's opportunities for product innovation, whether that's through your own product, I guess, distribution, or with partners or additional products that have that value alignment that could present an opportunity. Once again, thinking of examples, this first one I don't think it would be my cup of tea, but it's an interesting one regardless. Dirty soda is apparently a trend they've seen on social media where people were taking their soft drink, they had some coffee creamer and then some citrus to it. So Coffee Mates saw the opportunity and they created their own dirty soda. They listened to the people and they made the product what they wanted, and as a subsequent reap the rewards. So an interesting trend inspired by rule breaking. Who would have thought to put, I want to say, pop and citrus in your coffee? But in saying that, just as a quick aside, recently came back from some travels in Southeast Asia, and never would have thought it, but orange juice and coffee, it is a wonderful thing. If you haven't tried it, highly recommend it. It is worth an exploration for sure. Another example of rule rebellion is a Sleepwell hot chocolate drink. So hot chocolate is a way to, gives you that dopamine hit in the sense that it's something comforting and relaxing, but they've also connected it in with a valerian, which is basically it's a vitamin that helps promote sleep. So it's a way to get comfort, but also has a functional component as well. And the final example is Happy, which is a cold brew coffee, and they connected in with mental health resources on their packaging. So it's a bit of an experience beyond the product as well, and also ties back to the company's values. Third one is probably the most difficult, but it's called value hackers. We all know inflation is hard. We're seeing the prices change in every way that we purchase as consumers ourselves, whether that is through food and beverage, through our clothing, retail. So inflation is still there, and it does still matter. And here are a couple examples we're talking about as dupes and deals. So people are looking for some alternatives, and that could be through your white label, those private labels, or could be around a deal. What is the value that a consumer can see in your product beyond price? That could be convenience. It could be around supporting local. So there's so many different avenues that you could take. If you have a price model, and then you have a price model, but there is other ways in which you can look at connecting with the consumer, but being mindful they are shopping for prices and they will look for alternatives. So it's a matter of demonstrating the value beyond the price for that particular product if you're trying to get them to pick you. As an example of a couple of different stats, just to show you specifically how people have ranked the priorities of certain factors when it comes to purchasing. So this survey was done by KPMG in Ireland. So I guess that's important to note. This is based on the Irish consumer. But 45,000 different consumers were surveyed to understand what they found important, and it was price. In this particular example, if you're kind of looking, I'm saying left to right. I hope that, yes. Yeah, Libby's saying for you left to right. The price and quality matter. So if you have a high quality product, then they will probably, there's a higher chance they'll purchase your product if you didn't. So as I say, price doesn't always matter as long as you have something else as well that can match in with what it is the consumers are looking for. So the other examples here is the convenience. So if it is close by for where they're looking to purchase or where they live, if they want to support local retailers or purchase local goods. And then the final piece there, it's just important to note, sustainability is still a factor. I mean, top 6, it's still a factor that they're interested in, but just noting that it is not a priority when it comes to price. So it's an interesting mix for sure. I just want to check in if there's any questions before I keep going, just because I can't see that. I can see your faces, but I can't actually see the chat. So no, all good.
Okay. There are a couple there in the chat.
There are.
Yep.
Do you want to, sorry, I don't know how I can actually see them.
Yeah, I can read it.
Yeah, if you could, Peter, that'd be great.
Yep. So the first one was, do you know by any chance if it's possible to ship a consolidated container of dry fish and meat from Canada to the US? If yes, what would be the temperature?
Ooh. Great question. Unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to tell you offhand. This kind of ties in nicely with a piece I do have at the end. We do have a service that can help us find these questions for you. So it's part of our trade market intelligence service. It's a personalized service allowing us to help answer these questions based on what's publicly available, because there would be indication regards regulation for your temperature, and it would be specific to your product and specific to the market that you're looking to enter. So there is an answer. I just unfortunately do not have it, but we can look that up for you afterwards for sure.
Joseph,
Okay.
also I wanted to mention, please stay tuned because we may have people that are able to answer this question on day 3 in particular, but please keep attending day 2, 3, and 4, and you can ask this question again at some point. Thank you.
Yeah. And the second part of that was just about consolidating a container. So I think the answer to the second part would be the same.
Yeah.
For sure. And then there was another question, just Canada's competitive, this is more a statement, and then the next one is a question. So Canada's competitive strategy to increase export markets in other countries. I think Korea, Australia are potential emerging markets for us to export frozen blueberries to. And I have observed that Canada's share in the UK is decreasing compared to other competitors. Do you help with the competitive strategy for this?
So we don't specifically help with a competitive strategy, but there is a strategy. So the Indo-Pacific strategy is something that is really prevalent in our conversations at the moment, and it's specifically around, I guess, Atlantic Canada through ACOA and our partnership with our Atlantic Canadian provinces. We do play a role, and we do have activity that is tied to understanding the Indo-Pacific market and who the consumer is, how to get there, and what are the opportunities for Nova Scotia. So there is conversation happening around that, and I do believe there is some work that I was going to touch on a little bit later that a particular research project has been done to seek some additional insights. We don't have information to share, but there is information coming. So I suppose the answer to the question is yes, we definitely see the opportunity in the Pacific, and it is definitely growing. And there is a role for Nova Scotia to play, and that conversation and that role will be ever continuous. So watch this space. We do have more information to come on that.
And Maria, just for your information, Rachel did put a link in the chat there to blueberry market data for Australia. So the great example of collaboration and taking the power of everybody in the room. So
excellent. Thanks, Rachel.
Maria, will you be able to share your slides with the participants? Because I think there was also a question in the chat.
Yeah, definitely. And you'll notice that I do source on the bottom. So if there's anything you want to dive deeper into that you think you'd just like to know a little bit more, I should have all of the links on the slides as well to share to some of those the original sources.
Great, thank you.
Excellent. So in regards to, I guess, value hackers, as I said, we all feel the pinch, and there's a couple of different tactics that consumers are taking to, I guess, to approach this pinch. In particular, an example here is 53% are eating home instead of eating out. And I think that really plays as an opportunity for anyone who has a product that sits in the grocery store that may form part of that meal planning. They're also cutting back on non-essential spending, investigating private labels. I know Peter touched on this a little bit earlier around the opportunity of private labels and the way in which that could be an opportunity for some businesses and their models if they're looking at, they have the quantity available to support that opportunity, but just one worth noting. And the final piece there is some consumers are actually buying smaller quantities or packaging. So they're looking for something that solves an immediate need, but not a long-term need. So they may not be stocking up their pantries like they used to. It's more of a consume as required type of a model. So that's just something to bear in mind when you're looking at entering and engaging with these consumers. And I guess the other piece here to note is that it's not specific to one particular income band. So there is this feeling of, the pressure of the price crunch is affecting all segments, and that food at home opportunity, as you can see here, is definitely one area that could potentially be an opportunity for us to investigate. So from a business, what does that mean? What are opportunities that we have in this space? I touched on this a little bit earlier, but price is only one component of your product. It's thinking about what convenience am I serving? What is it quality? Have I done everything in my production piece that demonstrates that this is quality? And if Nova Scotia is any indication, then yes, there's a lot of amazing quality and people who build quality products here. So I definitely think we can play beyond the price. It's around building loyalty and engagement. I think I talked before around, and something else around the unboxing and the packaging, thinking about the packaging that you have in that product that is engaging. It is more than just the experience of eating. It's around the whole experience of the product, from the purchasing, the visuals, the taste, the touch. So thinking about all of those components as well. And the last piece is around that packaging and bundling. So thinking beyond your product, is there another opportunity for product alignment, or if you have similar products in your range that you may be able to bundle together into a package that demonstrates additional value over and above the one product. So those are a couple of things to keep in mind, and to give you some examples of what that could look like. Jenny's Ice Cream is a small batch coffee ice cream company in the States. And so they use all local natural ingredients, and she themes her flavors. So she builds these little packages of different types of ice cream based on what's happening in the market. So, or what's happening in seasonally. So it could be a Thanksgiving range, it could be a Christmas range, or a summer range, or I'm feeling blue range. So that's just an example of how a company has taken their whole product line and they've packaged it in a way that meets the need or a mood of a client. Another example is the Happy Meal. I mean, everybody knows the Happy Meal and the toy. The toy is a value add for consumers. They're already going to come and buy that Happy Meal for their kid, the burger and the fries and the drink. And the gift, or the toy, is a gift basically in that instance. And so they're using it as an opportunity to leverage across brands or trends or something else that's happening into the market that helps them remain relevant. So that's just an interesting example. And then the third one here is Clean Skins. So I'm not sure if that name happens here as well, but it's ultimately the same as the private label. So in Australia, wines are very popular, and they do clean skin brands. So if they have an additional quantities, particularly it's a blend. So in this example, this is a soft red. So it's made of a number of varietals from a number of different vintages. And they add a clean skin. And these can also be considered private labels. If in businesses, hotels often use clean skins and they label it with their own products. So that's another opportunity of partnership in that product white label environment that some may look to investigate. The fourth trend is fundamentally nutrition, and that is around the idea that food is functional. Food can be functional, but food also, because it hits a need. So this has really come prevalent more recently when weight loss drugs like Ozempic has come into play. And Ozempic itself has a natural suppression or food suppression to it. So people are looking for, what can I eat that gives me all the nutrients that I need for the day to survive ultimately. So that's one example that's really sort of pushed this back into the market. But there's so many opportunities beyond that. And what really comes into play, and this kind of touches a little bit on the technology side too, it's really around trusting the process. It's around trusting the product and the business behind the product in the process that they've done. So this ties into that communication piece. So if you have a process, just make it clear, make it understood. If it's nutritious, what nutritional elements are we looking at? How does that fit within the daily take and the requirements? So it's just something of understanding the communication piece around the process taken to develop that product. Health and wellness is so important. It's very prevalent and interesting to know from a food and beverage perspective. It's actually taking up a substantial, not a substantial, but a portion of that market. It's about 20% is the percentage, they say, of all packaged food is focused on health and wellness. So that's about a quarter, if you think about it. So it's definitely an opportunity in some instances, and it's growing as we continue to focus on what can we do to improve our sense of self and our life. And so it's really around that sustainability piece, but from the human core component. And that's also where that functional food comes into play. So it's around, I'm consuming this because I'm enjoying it and I need to eat, but also it gives me something. So it could be the vitamins, it could be the nutrition, it could elements. So there's a place for functional food. If we're looking at what the consumers are saying around how to be this fundamentally nutritious, interestingly enough, people are getting some of their information from online or free sources. So it's important to be part of that conversation. So when you're being part of that conversation, that it's truthful, it's factual, it's clear, people are actually able to understand. And it's one of those important pieces before that Peter touched on. It's about trust. If you become a trustworthy source of knowledge because you're being clear and transparent about how you build your product, what you include in your product, and how it provides benefit to your consumer, there will be lots of opportunity that can present from that. An example here is clients and consumers in Brazil are looking to feel full longer. So they're looking for products that give them that function of fullness. So that's an interesting thing to play. In Australia is another example. They understand the role that they play in being healthy and maintaining a healthier lifestyle is about being fit and consuming things that are helping with proper nutrition. And the final piece there is around understanding the meeting the needs. So looking for products that could be specific to them. So that could be, whether it's low sugar or low salt. So the more information and the more clear and upfront you can be about the product function that you have, then the more opportunity there could be in meeting those needs for a consumer. So I guess to reiterate in that space, it's around being clear, factual, and sharing the information that you have. And ensuring that it's, people are looking for things that are realistic and accessible. They want to be fit, but they want to see those immediate results, and they want to understand how the food that they consume can help them do that. So if it is the healthy and organic, or it has certain elements to that, they let them know. Just be clear about it and let them know. And the opportunity that's in this space, and it may be something that happens more moving forward, is the incorporation of smart technology. And what I mean by that could be like the smartwatches or the Apple Watches, where the health tells you need to walk, or in particular for some individuals who have an illness that requires them to take sugar or a particular snack, then the technology can weave in and understanding what the gap is in regards to nutrition. So that may be an opportunity moving forward about being a product that can help fill that need for a consumer. A couple of examples. Good idea, sparkling water. So that's sparkling water. It's wonderful because it has a lovely flavor palette, but that also demonstrates some of the additional health benefits as a result of that to the consumer. So it's more than just a drink, but it's a functional drink. An example here is food. So they offer packaging of a delivery meal service. It's all of the required nutritional value and nutrients for the day, all packaged up nicely. So it only takes 5 minutes to prepare, and that really is that convenience piece that we know is super important to people as well. And the final example from my Australian friends is Chobani, and they're highlighting the fact that they're natural ingredients, and naturally through their processes ingredients. So but it's about informing the consumer that that is what they're made of and how they could tap into that.
And Maria, before you move on to the next one, there was a question about interested to learn more about probiotic beverage export. So I think you just covered a lot of that in your trend 4 in terms of sort of those, we'll say good for you or better for you product. Yep. I think there's some great insights to take away in terms of how to position a probiotic product into that space. So I just wanted to mention that somebody had asked about that, and I think you gave some great insights there without even knowing into that. And then also for people just to on the chat that Yulia did put a link in there to the site where people can get a lot of this Canadian food and beverage export data. So if you're looking for that link, it is in the chat there. So.
Excellent. Great. Thanks, Peter. Excellent. Well, I'm on my final 2 trends, and they're both tied to the world of sustainability. So the first one is really around, I guess, the sustainability more holistically. And a couple of things to call out here is people are greenwashed out. And so that's really around the green messaging that we see in a lot of information historically. And I think people were tagging on the organic opportunities without fully, as there wasn't much regulation behind it. They were using it loosely in some instances where it may not have been relevant. So that trust in the market is a little bit uncertain. And so there's an opportunity for businesses now to be real and to be open and transparent around what it is that they have and be accountable for the ingredients and the processes that they use. And so there's the other sort of flip side of this is people are also greenwashed out in the sense that they feel like they're contributing and they're taking steps to be sustainable and support the world, but they're not seeing the benefits by the small things that they feel that they're doing, and they want to see governments and businesses to be doing more. So there's almost a bit of a pushback, and that's where some of that accountability is coming into play. So as a business, how can you share the things that you're doing? Because in many instances, there's so much happening at that business core level that the consumer has no idea about. So there's really an opportunity to demonstrate and to share your wins about the efforts that are being undertaken. And it's not necessarily about adding new things, but just almost just sharing the spaces that you're playing in already. And the other piece around that is the affordability. We do know that sometimes when you have the sustainability price tag on it, it can be more costly than other products. And so thinking about how can we incorporate sustainability without passing on that price to the consumer at all times? So what does that look like? And it's a conundrum, and then there is no finite solution on that, but it's just something to be mindful of. And that transparency is key. So I'm harping on about it in every opportunity, but it's really about that communication. So what is it the consumer wants? What can we share with the consumer? Because they ultimately just want to feel part of the conversation and feel informed. And because you can see here, this is some of the different actions that consumers are taking. So this goes back to that greenwash place of like, they feel like they're doing something and what else can they do? And they want to see some of those bigger companies stepping in and playing a role as well, or at least understanding what are they doing so they don't feel like they're taking that alone. And a couple of examples that I think we've all seen in our own self is the reducing waste and reducing plastic, recycling items, or trying to buy recycling. So even as an example here, the sustainable product items is much higher than you would think in some of those other examples that we'd seen earlier around the why or how they would purchase a product. From a business perspective, what does that look like? What are some opportunities you can play into? It's being forthright and factual. If you're doing something, share it. If there's an opportunity to share it. If you are, as I mentioned before, there's so many ways in which Nova Scotia products are organic and are doing wonderful things, but it's how to bring that messaging out in whether it's in the product packaging on the website or through your marketing activity. So just think of those opportunities to share and communicate. The other piece on this is a regulatory change. We know that there has been some changes. There's some regulation around, this is more so on the production side, but like emissions or carbon emissions. And if you're shipping anywhere in the UK, there's going to be regulations around how you make your claims and how you justify your claims. So that's just something to be mindful if you're looking at other markets. These regulatory changes are happening from a government landscape as well. So it's not just the consumer looking for it, it's the countries are responding to what the consumers are looking for. So you might just get stuck in the middle eventually. So it's something to be mindful of, that the sustainability plays a huge role and it will continue to be part of the conversation, and to be mindful of how how countries are enforcing some new regulatory changes around sustainable labeling or credentials required. And that taps into supply chain, which is also my next piece a little bit as well, but it's noting that it's not just about you, but it's everyone that you work with as well. So across, whether it's your raw ingredients or the distribution partners that you utilize or the retail agents as well. So being mindful across the full supply chain of your product, how sustainability plays a role in that space. So a couple of examples, and this first one's not really an example, but it's just noting, once again, the stricter regulations are happening. And it's just something to be mindful around the messaging and the claims that are made on your product, that if you can validate and back them up, then that's ultimately what they're looking for in this scenario. Example here is Provenance, which I think is really interesting. It's a platform. It's not necessarily food and beverage, but from beauty and health brands, it actually validates the claims. So there's people out there that will investigate if there's a claim being made. Is it truthful? Is it factual? They want to understand the messaging and ensuring that there's the truthful behind these comments as well. So something to be mindful as more businesses like that may pop up as we evolve. And the final trend, as I said, it's staying in that sustainability supply chain, but it is something here. I think there's some opportunity. So the supply chains, as I mentioned before, it's about understanding some of the emissions that can happen across the process. But the opportunity here is that people are also they're open to change. So as we know that the supply chains may shift and change as government regulations come into play, or different powers come into play, or just general geopolitics may have some fluctuations in the access of supply chains. People are open to new products from new sources and new opportunities. So that's something to see as an opportunity versus a limitation that we're looking at. So as we think globally and what's happening across the world, how can we act locally? Is there a local supplier or a local alternative to a particular ingredient that you have? Or is there a way to, try a new type of ingredient that is adjacent to what you have, that may be a new flavor palette for a particular product that you hadn't thought of a way? And that can also provide some sustainability in your product, in your business, if there is that fluctuation happening outside your remit. And I guess the most important piece here is the world is voting. Interestingly, in 2024, over 50% of our population is voting or going to the polls. And some of our really huge players, if you think about today as an example, today of all days, the US is going to be a huge day. Tomorrow's going to be a new day, one way or the other. So with that may come new regulations or new trade agreements. So it's just something to be mindful that there's change afoot, but there also could be some great opportunity. So just noting here from a consumer's perspective, what are they saying? Interesting. I think this German example is they want to try new food. They go and they try new world cuisines at restaurants, but they're particularly interested in having those cuisines being sourced by ingredients that are locally. So that's that really think globally, act locally kind of mindset example. So there could be some opportunities that sit in that space. In France, adults agree that the effects of climate change is going to impact what they see in the grocery stores. So they know what they see on the shelves today may not be on the shelves tomorrow. So that's just something that they are aware that change is afoot and that there may not, it may be some new things, so they're open to that as well. Interesting comment here with 77% of newer Canadians. So that's anyone not born in Canada or has lived here for less than 10 years. They'll often buy brands or products imported from their home country. And I can say that if that was me. So I lived in Australia for the last 15 years and I hunted down, it's Reese's Pieces is probably one of my favorite food, but peanut butter and chocolate is just not a combination that exists in Australia. And it made me very, very sad. So I would go out of my way to buy that product. Well, it's not necessarily Canadian, but it just is an example that if you need that comfort or you want a little bit of home, you will hunt it out, whether you get your parents to ship it to you or you find a store locally that has it available. So that's just something to note, that there may be some some new Canadians here looking for a little taste of home that we're able to offer. So that's just something that I'd call it. There's an opportunity that sits in that space. And the last one there is around the connection to where the food comes from. So that's thinking about the supply chain as a whole. Who's the farmer who did the coffee beans that you're drinking in the morning? And there is interested in understanding who they are and how their life looks like and how they went about, cultivating this product for you. So just some interesting things to note across the full supply chain there. And what does that look like from a business perspective? You can investigate alternate sources. So not saying you have to, but there is the opportunity, there is appetite in the industry, and there is ways in which that could be seen as an opportunity when it could feel like the opposite at times. And thinking about value alignment. So what are those opportunities for the consumer? What are they looking for? What are they feeling? And how can you marry that up with what you have available? And the final piece there is around regulations. I touched on this before, so I won't harp on it any further, but noting as the world goes to vote, some of that may shift and some of the trade policies and the availability of things may change and the requirements may change. So it's just something to be aware of and to be mindful of. And there's some great resources that will soon to come, I'm sure, once those are in place. So from a couple of examples, the first one is Coors. So they have taken their Peroni product and they've they've relocated their manufacturing plant to the US. And that's purely around to support a reliable supply chain. They're finding some disruptions, and so that can happen in some larger scales, that people are nearshoring or they're moving products closer to their core consumers. So that may continue to evolve. Cold press is an example. They do orange juice, but they found that the prices of the oranges were getting too high, that they needed to diversify. So they introduced a new mandarin flavor. So that's them being a variety of trying a new product or an alternative source. And then the third one here is another platform, just to note that technology plays a role in that consumer awareness and people want to understand where their products come from or how they're involved. This particular platform, Boycott, sounds weird when I say that, Boycott. Just make sure. And ultimately what they do is a consumer can scan a product and they can understand what alternatives are or how do they support. How are they in the range of supporting social causes? And that's really around the values, the core values or value alignment between a business and a product. So just noting there's some platforms out there that are keen to validate your claims and or call them out if it's not quite aligned with what you're saying. So it really comes down to that communication, that trust, and ensuring a consistent and clear message for our consumers. So before I jumped to my next piece, those are kind of the 6 key trends that we touched on. Is anybody have any questions before I continue on? I wish I could see the chat.
Yeah, I can just jump in for you just for a second. So
Yep.
Patricia did have a question about other categories, obviously what other categories are opportunities. And Matthias did address some of it there for sure. So I think, which is good. Patricia actually said she had to leave. So maybe I can jump in tomorrow when she said she'd be back. And then there was a comment there about, or a question about saying, assuming we're trying to cater to the Asia Pacific region, does it make more sense to get the products manufactured, packaged in those regions to keep costs low? So kind of like your Molson Coors example, where they're making Italian beer in the United States now. So I think it's definitely there's no one size fits all answer to that. I think it's really investigating, the cost of doing something in one market and shipping it versus doing it in another market, but also being able to maintain integrity and production and those kind of things. So, but it's something that people should definitely explore.
Exactly.
And then there was a question about B2B platform in Nova Scotia or in Canada to find suppliers for food private labels. And there is, I see Matthias did put that in there, a link to Mixer, which is a Food and Beverage Atlantic platform where people can get information from other businesses. And then there is also what's called the Private Label Manufacturers Association, which they have an annual conference and things, which is more of a North American body, but there is that resource out there too. So, and that's it for the chat right now.
I love this team effort. Thanks, Peter. And also thanks, Matthias. It's very wonderful for helping join in there. All right, I'm on my very final slides. So what's ahead? And this is no surprise. As I mentioned before, global elections. Today is a big day. One of our largest trading partners is going to vote. So I think tomorrow will be a new day in one way or the other. So it's one of those things, they both have different trading platforms, and just being mindful that things may change regardless. So just be mindful of what those regulations and trade opportunities may look like. So there'll be, I'm sure, lots of briefing material as a result of this, but with your specific product, it's something to be mindful of and keep an eye out for. I touched on this a little briefly earlier in the presentation, but we have recently undertaken some Indo-Pacific research, and that's really understanding what the opportunities from a food and beverage perspective could look like in those particular markets for Nova Scotia. So watch this space, more information to come. And the third piece is around broad audience reports. So I work within the strategy and research team here at Invest Nova Scotia. And so historically, we've done these things called strategic reports, and we're calling them broad audience. And the intent behind that is it supports a broad audience to share some insights and some information on a topic that is of need, or an area that they're interested in something more. So they'll be coming very soon, but if there's something that you think that may be a useful idea or topic that you'd love to see covered in something like this, please feel free to reach out to anyone at the Invest Nova Scotia team. Happy to take any of those ideas or opportunities on board to discuss. And then for my final, I guess more of a shout out for the service that I provide here, or my team, my wonderful, very intelligent, talented team helps provide. So it's called the Trade Market Intelligence Service Program. And so it is a free service that we offer to Nova Scotia businesses looking to export. So today I covered some really high line, very broad consumer trends, but the purpose of this particular service here is to really ensure that it's personalized. So if I'm talking about those trends and I'm talking to you and you have a business need, I'm going to talk them specifically about your business. So the types of areas that we cover in the service could be around market characteristics. So if you're looking to go to a new market, what is the demand, size, or who are the current key players that are playing in that space related to your product that may be of interest? Who are the competitors? So who else is playing in that space, and what are their claims, and how do we stack up against that? What are the regulations or certifications required to enter that market? And what are the networks? So what kind of associations or trade shows or events that could you participate in that, to engage in that market further? So we do offer this service. It is based on secondary data. So we don't do any surveys or focus groups or interviews. It's all based on secondary information. We basically collate what's in the wonderful universe into a report to answer those personalized questions. So I just wanted to shout out and give that note that is a service that is available should you looking to enter into a new market of interest. So without any further ado, that is the end of my piece. Thank you so much for your time today. Hopefully I slowed down. I was mentally noting it, but hopefully we made some words, but we'll be sharing the presentation afterwards. So feel free to, hopefully it'll all be captured in there. So any questions? I'm going to stop sharing so I can actually see the chat.
Thank you very much, Maria. And just to follow up a little bit, Joseph, on your earlier questions and the questions about data that's online, whether it's free, whether it's paid. trade market intelligence not only uses trade data online and free sources of secondary data, but also paid subscriptions. So you will get a much more detailed information, very personalized, even though we do not do primary data. And Maria just mentioned that. But yes, rather than you sitting there for the whole day and trying to find that information, please contact us, ask Maria, and I'm sure we will be able to help. Thanks a lot.
So thank you, Maria.
Yeah, sorry, just before I forget very quickly, for those people who joined after 9 a.m., just wanted to remind that there are 10 slots for one-on-one meeting with Peter Chapman. If you're interested, please contact me. And it's on a first come, first served basis. So don't forget about this. Also, Peter mentioned something earlier about the insurance and about the logistics. We will have some speakers who will touch upon those issues on day 3 or day 4. I can't even remember now. Sorry, my bad. Anyway, keep showing up for all 4 days, and I'm sure you'll hear answer to some of your questions. For those of you who want to drill even deeper into this, we will be offering Incoterms 2020, a 2-day session on November 26th and 28th about insurance, logistics, responsibility, who's responsible for what part of the journey, how this is regulated. Please sign up. It's free, and it's also available to all Atlantic Canadian companies. So if you know someone in other provinces who not from Nova Scotia, but who wants to participate in this and who is interested in learning more, they're most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Yulia. And I see lots of comments, people looking for your contact information, Maria. So obviously you've sparked some interest from people, which is fantastic. So I don't know if you have a moment, you want to put that in the chat. And I'm sure, Yulia, we can share that as well with people so that they know how to find you, Maria, and ask more questions. But I think the great thing is that it sparked so much conversation about different things and ideas and got people thinking. So awesome. I've got a bunch of notes here myself, which is important takeaways. And I love all the examples. I think it's great to show people real life examples of these trends so you can see them in action. So thank you very much for being here with us. And Yulia mentioned in our 4th session, we're going to tackle the logistics piece. So that's we'll be taking that on. And then also Matthew Berrigan from Invest Nova Scotia is here, and he'll share some opportunities of working with Invest Nova Scotia, the support that is there for businesses looking to export. So we're going to dive into that too. So there's Maria's contact in the chat for people. You can grab that. I'll just check in, I guess, one more time, whether there's any more questions or anything. And if not,
tomorrow, please don't forget, we are touching upon how to leverage the Canada brand, Nova Scotia brand, and your company brand, and how you actually become more successful using and utilizing all those brands together. And we will have some case studies with live, real companies who are successful exporters. So please don't forget to join us tomorrow.
So thank you very much for being here with us. We really appreciate all the input, questions, comments. It's great. And sharing as well information. So we really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you here tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you, Maria.
Thanks all.
See you guys tomorrow.
Bye.